Okay, so it's 12 o'clock here in Cedar Rapids at the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library in Iowa. So it's a privilege for me to be with you, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we have a unique opportunity to be together with Dr. Pavel Demeš and Miroslav Konvalina because here we are to listen and to be in interaction with our new series under the title Voices from the Homelands webinar. For today, the title of this webinar is the 80th anniversary end of the Second World War, and I would be more than happy to start this webinar representing the museum. And let me now ask Dr. Pavel Demeš and Miroslav Konvalina to start the webinar. At the same time, I would like to ask Madison to step in if there's anything special to be added as far as instructions are concerned and so
Yeah,
on. Again,
yeah,
welcome.
just really quick before we turn it over, thank you everyone for joining us. We're excited to have you here today. If you do have any questions, please wait until the very end when we have a Q&A session. If you'd rather type your message or type your question out, you can send it to the chat. You can send it to me personally, and I can ask the question for you later on. But I do ask that all questions are held to the end. Thank you. Hope you guys enjoy.
So, thank you, Madison. 80 years ago, the most destructive and lethal war in history approached its end in May 1945. World War II came to an end in Czechoslovakia with scenes of liberation, but also chaos. While most of Western Bohemia was freed by the American army under General George S. Patton, Soviet forces took control of Prague and much of the rest of the country. Today, we are here with a special guest, and we will talk for about an hour about the war and the consequences. And from the Czech Republic, we invited two of them. I would like to introduce Ivan Puš, a historian, assistant professor at the Department of History, Faculty of Arts, Palacký University, Olomouc. Welcome, Ivan.
Hello to everybody, and thanks a lot for inviting me.
And from Minneapolis, we have from Minnesota, we have Patrick Duane. He is the author of the show, The Accidental Hero. I saw it in the United States in Pilsen many times, and he will speak about his grandfather and about the person who, on the last week of the World War II, helped to free some of the Czech towns and villages while his grandparents were in the Middle West, where they escaped in the 80s. And I would like also to turn over back to Madison and to Pavel to introduce their guests.
Okay, so let me thank also NCSML for another opportunity. 2 months ago, we had former ambassadors of Czech Republic, Michal Žantovský, and former ambassador of Slovakia to the United States, Martin Bútora, who focused on relations between our two respective republics with the United States. Today's topic is quite hot for us. World War II celebration 80th anniversary, which brought a lot of attention both in Slovakia, Czech Republic, but across whole Europe, because this was round, very significant anniversary, which showed not only historical aspects, but also contemporary one, because we are having war just behind the borders of Slovakia, and Russians celebrated it completely differently than us. So we will be touching today historical aspects as well as contemporary, where we will compare via two military historians, Ivan Puš from Olomouc and Martin Poš from Bratislava, Slovakia. Martin is well-known young historian from Slovak Academy of Sciences focusing on 20th century, particularly on World War II history. And you will hear from him also that he will touch upon role of United States in World War II, Slovak National Uprising in particular, because he was part of some of the activities related to that. And after that, I'm particularly pleased that we will have Pavel Macko, retired general. Pavel was highest serving general of Slovakia in NATO forces. He commanded the tens of thousands of people, including he was part of operation in Afghanistan, and he knows military aspect of World War II, and not only World War II, but also what is important, that he will make few comments on how we commemorated this year in comparison with previous round anniversaries, and also impact of Russian aggression in Ukraine, how it is influencing, also looking at World War II and some of the consequences propaganda related. Surely Martin can address some of the topics of propaganda as well. But I'm particularly happy that Doug Mix from University of Nebraska is with us, who will help us to frame the history in 5 to 7 minutes, because it was quite complex. But since he is teaching, he knows how to compress complicated topics. Doug, we are very happy you are with us. Please fire away.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, let's get my technology to work here. Perfect. Okay, what I want to do this afternoon is take a very brief look at the period in Czechoslovak history from roughly 1918 to 1945, and then my colleagues will carry it on forward from there. There we go. We began in 1918 with the creation of the first Czechoslovak Republic. This was a liberal democracy, and it was the most stable of all the liberal democracies in Central Europe in the interwar period. The Czechoslovakian First Republic was a multi-ethnic state that was made up of, as you can see, a whole bunch of different ethnicities. And this wasn't so much a problem in the 1920s because they were all trying to figure out kind of who they were and where they were. But in the 1930s, these differences become much more pronounced and lead to a number of different issues that will eventually tear the republic apart with the help of outside forces. Okay. As one Slovak minister said, the First Czechoslovak Republic was a republic where all ethnic groups were equal, but where some were more equal than others. And the Constitution promised language autonomy for all the different ethnic groups, but it was not always given. And by the 1930s, Czech was the dominant language, both administratively and governmentally, and not all the different ethnic groups thought that good. And frustrations by Slovak folk, and especially the ethnic Germans, who had not really wanted to be part of Czechoslovakia in 1918, become especially pronounced. Now you can say, well, why would the Allies be dumb enough to put together a multi-ethnic state in 1918? Well, they were trying to employ the wisdom of Solomon and the touch of Midas at Versailles. And they thought that having a large state rather than a bunch of very small states was better for the security of Central Europe. Hence, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania are multi-ethnic states, but they're big and they have enough landmass. The French and the British thought at Versailles to actually provide security. Doesn't work out that way, but that was the idea prevalent in the springtime in Versailles. Okay, the main issues that arise to tear Czechoslovakia apart come in 1938 with the Sudetenland crisis. The Sudetenland is that area in red on the map at the upper right corner of the screen. And Hitler, of course, had been agitating for the annexation of ethnic Germans in the Sudeten region since March of 1938, and had been agitating for the annexation of ethnic Germans into the Reich from 1935 onwards. And this was just another, step in that process. He had a tremendous ally in a guy named Conrad Heinlein, who was the leader of the fifth column of Sudeten Germans who supported the Nazis and wanted to join with Nazi Germany. And here he is. The question by the middle part of 1938 was that the Czechoslovak government didn't want to let about a fifth of their country go, and there was a real question of war, and the Czechs were preparing to fight the war, and Czechoslovaks were preparing to fight the war against the Nazis. And here the Western Allies step in, because the British and the French do not believe they are prepared to fight a war, and they'll do anything to avoid it. And so they decide to apply the olive branch of diplomacy, which results in a meeting and then an agreement at Munich on the 30th of September. The Munich Agreement gives the Sudeten region to Nazi Germany, and the Czechs are forced to accept it, whether they want to or not. And within a number of days after the signing of the agreement, Nazi troops moved into the Sudetenland. And what was left was this kind of Czechoslovak rump state that itself was gobbled up into Nazi Germany on the 15th of March, 1939. And it just becomes, part of the broader German Reich. Czechoslovakia was dismembered as a state, with the Czech lands becoming a protectorate and Slovakia becoming independent, and transitioned into a Nazi client state. The Czechs were seen by the Nazis as subhumans, the same way they saw the Russian Slavs and the Polish Slavs, and they were either to be Germanized if they were young enough and uneducated enough, or if they were older and educated, they were to be liquidated. And between 1939 and 1945, over 136,000 Czechs were killed by the Nazis in the protectorate. Slovakia had a different course during the war. It was a republic, the first Slovak republic under Joseph Tiso, who was an ordained Catholic priest, which leaves some issues for historians. And this was nothing more than a wholly owned Nazi subsidiary. Tiso was a de facto dictator, and everybody did what he was told. He supported the German invasion of Poland in 1939 by sending troops. And he received roughly 300 square miles of Polish territory in return. And he also supported the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Tiso was vehemently anti-Semitic, and throughout his time in power, he had sent over 2/3 of all of Slovakia's Jewish population to the camps where they were murdered. This endeared him greatly to Hitler, but not always to his own population. And in August 1944, there is a significant uprising against the Tiso government. And initially, this was very successful, and it controlled about half of central Slovakia and over 60% of the country's population. And here is the area at its height controlled by the rebel army. Unfortunately for them, the Germans were easily able to move troops to the area, and by the 20th of October, they had crushed the rebellion. Tiso survives until the end of the war, and he's tried for war crimes, and he's hung for his war crimes in 1947. But as the Allies from both the East and West close in and the Germans collapse, there's not a whole lot the Czechoslovakians can do except watch and wait for liberation. And on the 6th of May, 1945, elements of George Patton's Third Army liberated Pilsen. As you can see here, a bunch of happy people. And on the 9th of May, the Soviets entered Prague and brought an end to the war in Central Europe. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. And Mirek, now please, floor is yours to introduce your first guest.
So Ivan Push is speaking to us from city of Olomouc, from Palacký University. As I mentioned, he is a historian, assistant professor at the Department of History, Faculty of Arts, Palacký University, Olomouc, and we met while he was in 2021 a Fulbright scholar in residence at the University of Houston. And also, he will be part of our podcast about the Second World War, which will be released shortly by the NCSML. So, Ivan, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Mirek. I would like to mention the perspective or the story, let's say, after 1945, the way how the anniversaries of the end of the war have been celebrated since 1945. And all the events and the entire historical process that Doug Biggs explained and described played a huge role. The story or the way how the World War War, the World War II, the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, the relationships between Czechs and Germans, how they were interpreted, that started to be created, explaining really since the last weeks and months of the war. And until today, it is an important part of the year. The anniversaries have been celebrated in the Czech Republic at all levels of society, starting with top politicians. Let's say, of course, there are speeches and reflections by the President of the Czech Republic, the President of Senate, Speaker of House of Representatives, and other politicians, including local governments and the local sports clubs. First of all, Sokol, the Sokol Sports Club with this long tradition, plays a role. Military clubs, of course, not only in Pilsen, but in other cities attend these events, and of course, these survivors, people who survived, who experienced World War II, still attend these events. Of course, unfortunately, in the course of time, they are passing away, but still there is this attendance by them. And what's changing, because there are still basically the same sites of memory, places in the cities, the former concentration camps, ghettos, work camps. It means places where forced labor happened. These sites of memory remain basically the same, but what's changing is its interpretation, the framework, the framework of it, how these events and sites of memory are explained and commemorated. So, and I was mentioning the end of war, or basically a few years after the war, the 1940s, the 1950s. It was a time when, let's say, the collective memory was created. And one of the point of it was May the 9th, not May the 8th, but May the 9th. And it was a part of these celebrations of these anniversaries until the early 1990s, actually. May the 9th was celebrated between 1951 and 1991. What was the reason? The reason was that this date was a date when a treaty or a surrender between Nazi Germany or the former Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was signed. And that was the reason why the Czechoslovak state or Czechoslovakia and other states of the former Eastern group celebrated or have to celebrate this May the 9th. And yes, of course, these events are commemorated, or the anniversary of the World War II is not commemorated only in May, June, but during the entire year as well. They are still present regarding the everyday perspective because we have streets, and other places which were named after the liberators, after officers, generals of the Soviet army. Of course, nowadays, or precisely after 1989, some streets were named, of course, after survivors, after heroes, officers, soldiers, generals of the American army, and possibly of others. So that's the situation. And of course, this framework, this way how the anniversary of World War II is celebrated, is basically depends on the framework, on the current political situation, on regime, but not only on the regime and current political situation home, but abroad as well. Of course, the international situation still, of course, plays a huge role.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivan. And, several times Pilsen was mentioned, the city liberated by the American army under General George S. Patton. I just came back a couple days ago from Pilsen, and the city officials agreed this session. They probably will be part of our audience, or will be also listening the recordings. The city of Pilsen has launched its 5-day Liberation Festival, in the beginning of May, celebrating the 80th anniversary of the city's liberation by the U.S. Army in 1945. This year edition included the visit of the Belgians, King Philip, and Czech President Peter Pavel. Among the special guests was also 99 years old U.S. veteran Harry Hansen, returning to the Czech Republic for the first time since the World War II. Some more than 170 relatives of American and Belgian liberators also arrived. Highlights included the Sunday Freedom Convoy parade with over 350 historic military vehicles. Organizers expected tens of thousands of visitors to attend the Europe's largest World War II commemorations. I am saying that because we hope that Patrick Duane will be again part of it with his one-man show, The Accidentally Hero. It's about his grandfather, Matt Konob, who grew up speaking Czech in a Bohemian farming community in Wisconsin. The story about the last week of the World War II, when Konop led the liberation force into Czechoslovakia, freed some of the Czech villages where his parents have lived prior to immigrating to America. So it will be up to Patrick to a little bit mention this personal story, which we are both countries are very proud of.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Merrick. Great to see everyone here. My grandfather, as Merrick said, grew up speaking Czech in a Czech immigrant farming enclave in Wisconsin. And when he became a lieutenant colonel in World War II, the last thing really he was thinking about was his Czech background. They made their way in the 2nd Infantry Division, D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, and then they were camped just outside of Leipzig, Germany, when they had an emergency meeting with the general, their commanding officer, who told them that they now will be moved under Patton's army and that they were to liberate southwestern Czechoslovakia. But the problem was though they had had German translators for their march across Germany, and French translators, they had no Czech translators. Well, because my grandfather spoke Czech, the general then made him the commander of the Advanced Liberation Party. When he and a group of 500 got to the border, he realized that the closest village to where they were, the closest Czech village, was a little dot on the map named Klenčí, which was his grandmother's hometown. All 4 of his grandparents had come from this region of Chodsko. So he was in charge. So we went in by himself and his driver, stumbled across a meeting of the local resistance in Klenčí. He walks in. He's the first American that they've ever seen. And not only does he start speaking to them in their language, he spoke to them in their very dialect and had a name that was unique to that particular area. Well, they couldn't believe their good fortune. They jumped up, hugging him, kissing him. He just kept making things up as he went along. And when he got to the capital city of that district, the city of Domažlice, they were waiting for him with banners because word had spread. And the banners in Czech said, "We are liberated by one of our own, Matt Konop." So then they found him. And then here's the picture. They put him on their shoulders and paraded him around town as Gde Domov Můj is being played for the first time on loudspeakers. And here, this thing that he had left behind, thinking there wasn't really much to see as he was chasing the American dream, his Czech heritage, suddenly he's face to face with the reality of who he is. He then the general had assigned him to go out ahead of the rest of the division there's the shot of Grandpa on the shoulders in a main square I know very well, in the main square of Domažlice. By the way, I turned all of this into a one-man show. My background is in theater on the business side and then also on the creative side. And I've toured the show around the country, and each year since 2013, I've brought it to Pilsen, and then starting in 2014 to Domažlice. They've since made Grandpa an honorary citizen. There's a bronze relief of him, of this scene that's on a building in Domažlice, and a whole bunch of other wonderful crazy things that have happened. So the general let him go out ahead of the rest of the division into Pilsen, which was being liberated by the 16th Armored Division. He shows up, ducks into the Slavia building on the main square, and then the next day, the general asks him to be the MC of a special banquet they were having in the ballroom of the Slavia building, and he was to conduct the event both in Czech and in English. The division's band played swing music. They traveled with a band. The band also served as the morgue, so kind of tough duty. They weren't just playing instruments. So at the stroke of 5 minutes before midnight, the band strikes up a fanfare. Grandpa excuses himself, goes over to the microphone that by this time is wired to loudspeakers in Pilsen's main square. And Ivan, this is linked directly to this date issue that you're talking about. And then he tells them all that he's got a special announcement, first in Czech, then in English. And he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the German army has surrendered. The war is over. Czechoslovakia is free." Well, the room, just the Czechs are hugging and crying, and and then the people in the main square hear it, and he goes to a window and he sees them pouring into the main square, and they're running in, and then some of the guests, some of the Czech guests, were a singing group. And the leader of the Czech guests brought the singing group over to the microphone where Grandpa just announced the news and had them sing for the first time in 6 years the Czech national anthem, Gde domov můj, which my grandfather knew because they would play that song at special occasions growing up in Stangleville, Wisconsin. So he's there singing over and over and over as the singing group and the people in the square and hundreds are pouring in for a party that lasted well past dawn the next day. And for Grandpa, the song is "Where is my home?" and it answers its own question with the final line, "The Czech land, my home, the Czech land, my home," which for my grandfather just awakened this whole curiosity about who he was and his Czech heritage. He didn't talk about the war. I only know this because 23 years after he died, my sister found his unpublished manuscripts in my Aunt Jean's basement, along with film footage. I have film footage of Pilsen and then also of the main square of Domažlice. And the interesting thing I find about this, and particularly the subject and what Ivan was just talking about, is that after 48, after the coup in Czechoslovakia and the regime took over, they changed the history. The lie that was being sold by Moscow was that the Red Army alone liberated Czechoslovakia. So slowly but surely, they snuffed my grandfather's story where it happened. And in our family, because Grandpa never talked about it, we didn't know. So almost within a couple of years, the story pops up in our family and then also in the Czech Republic. So today, Grandpa's story's out of the box. The Czechs are free. And I'm there every year with the story. And Mirek, I think I clocked in under 7 minutes, so I will stop talking with that. Thank you.
Thank you, but I hope that your show will be very soon in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm sure that it was shown all around. Even in Ford Theater in Washington and in the Bohemian National Hall in New York and all over Western Bohemia. So, Pavel, I turn to your guest.
Thank you very much, Ivan and Patrick, for framing both contemporary and historical part of this. And we are moving to our two guests who are in Bratislava, Slovakia. Both of them, as I mentioned, Martin is working at the Historical Institute of the Slovak Academy of Sciences. So Martin, if you would be so kind to frame how we have been celebrating this 80th anniversary and some of the aspects which you would like to add from what we already heard about liberation, and also if you could touch upon briefly this American component of which you were part of. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you excuse me. Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here. Good evening from Bratislava. I will start from the end of your question, if I may, and it's the role of Americans in the Slovak national uprising in 1944. So, of course, when we are talking about the situation in Slovakia or Central and Eastern Europe, it's understandable that it was not possible in the summer of 1944 for Americans to send a large army to Slovakia to help the insurgents to fought against the Nazi invasion. What is important is to see what the intelligence services of Western allies were doing at that time, because when we will take into account also the situation after the end of the war and the already mentioned communist coup in February 1948, we can say that the battle for Czechoslovakia was taking place already during the Second World War. And with this information, it's very interesting to see that also British and Americans were on the territory of the Slovak National Uprising as intelligence officers. It was, for example, work of Office of Strategic Services, American Intelligence Office, and of course, famous Special Operation Executive, British Special SOE. And when we are talking about the commemoration of Allied forces in Slovakia. Fortunately, despite some of our politicians today, we are talking also about Western allies. For example, last year was I also from the Institute of History we wrote some kind of official letter to support creation the plaque dedicated to the members of the American Office of Strategic Services in Banská Bystrica and also members of SOV who fought in the Slovak National Uprising, and most of them paid the highest price. They were murdered in Mauthausen at the start of the 1945, because at the end of the 1944 the German and Hlinka's paramilitary forces, collaboration forces in Slovakia, took them and sent them via various towns to Mauthausen, and they were murdered. So we are commemorating also Americans, and since 2017 you can find a memorial in the city center, in the center of town Polomka, with the names of the soldiers, of the agents which were from USA and from the Britain, which were helping insurgent army at the time of Slovak National Uprising. What is interesting, it's not only footprint from the wartime from America. After the war, for example, Americans of Slovak or Czech origin and also Franklin Delano Roosevelt Foundation financially supported creation of hospital in Banská Bystrica, and was named after Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And of course, during the communist regime, it was renamed, but today it's all again Hospital of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So there is some kind of commemoration of the role of Americans in our history. When we are talking about the commemoration in Slovakia in connection with the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, I think it's necessary to say that Slovak society is quite tribalized, and there you can find various groups of citizens. Mostly, I think, when we are talking not about the politicians, but about the people who are interested in history, we can say that today we are commemorating all the members of the states which helped to liberate Czechoslovakia or Slovakia. When we are talking about Slovak territory, it's necessary to talk also about the Red Army, of course, but also about the Romanian army and the Czechoslovak army group which were fighting in the east, but also to say also American forces in Pilsen. But when we are talking about the Czechs and Slovaks and their footprint in the local European or wartime resistance globally, I think it's necessary also to take account the role which was done by the Americans of Slovak and Czech origin in the American army. From my point of view, this is some topic we need to do some more research about it, but I think it will be really interesting chapter for the American and European history about the Second World War. So I hope I'm also under 7 minutes, and if you have any questions for me, I will be happy to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. And last but not least, General Pavel Macko, if you would be so kind to compare this year's celebration of 80th anniversary with previous round anniversaries, and also how it influences political dynamism, and lastly, how this war in Ukraine is either influencing, overshadowing this commemorative mood which we are supposed to have. Pavel, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, the Victory Day was always very important day in Czechoslovakia, also in Slovakia. However, the way we celebrated it or commemorated it was significantly changing. I spent 35 years in the military, and I can tell you during the Cold War, right after 1948, the way we celebrated significantly changed, and it was more like the Soviet style. Actually, not only the way we celebrated was influenced by the Soviet rule and communist regime, but also the history itself. And we have here a couple of historians, and the history was somehow distorted. And we were just taught about the Red Army role and maybe a little bit about Slovak National Uprising and the Czechoslovak Army Corps. But early after 1948, the Western Front veterans, including the ones from Royal Air Force, were squeezed out from the military. Some of them emigrated, some of them were even prosecuted and persecuted by the regime. So during the Cold War, we didn't know much about not only the history of liberation of Czechoslovakia and the western part of the Czechoslovakia. By the way, I was born in southern Bohemia, just on the line of contact between the Soviet Red Army troops and American troops close to Český Krumlov. But we didn't know the history of the World War II completely. There was overshadowed by just the Soviet influence and Soviet impact on the victory. So even my suggestion to the colleagues from the historians, we have seen during the old times the serious unknown war, which was about the Eastern Front, done in West. Probably it's time to make, even for nowadays, for our children and for our people, something similar about the World War II as it was seen by other fronts, not only the Eastern Front. So during the Cold War, the celebration was very similar to Russians. So every 5 years, since 1951 was the first military parade, Soviet style. And then every 5 years used to be organized military parade, very similar to the way the Soviets did and do actually Russia until now on the Red Square. After the Velvet Revolution, this tradition significantly changed. We abandoned the big military parades and demonstration of power and just moved towards more commemorative ceremonies, which are still held on the 8th of May. The date was changed, as already mentioned, and we also, it's accompanied by wrestling, some historical movies, but it's not so big event yet. It was significantly celebrated throughout the society as well as within the military. Now, since 2014, we see a little change. As Russia annexed Crimea, there was a silence, isolation of Russia, and basically they were not invited to most ceremonies, or if they were invited, they were just part of the group, and we didn't participate in their different festivities and celebrations. And dramatic change came after the Russian invasion to Ukraine. What we can see now is that Russians not only are begging war in Ukraine under false flag and false justification when they try to speak out that they are trying to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. But actually, if you look at the Russian state and the regime, it carries significant signs of neo-Nazism and ideology, but also practice. And at the same time, they are misusing the victory in World War II. First, falsifying it again, claiming it's like Russia was the only one or the most important player, while Ukraine was the same, and the other nations of the Soviet Union, as well as the whole global coalition. So that's the first problem. Then Russians are using also propaganda assets like the Night Wolves, which is a grouping of bikers, or Brother for Brother, who are actually under the claim that they are going to pay respect to the heroes of World War II. They are basically traveling the country and spreading their pro-Russian propaganda and propaganda against Western. So what you could see, that celebration, particularly this year, we have seen significant rift. Already a few years ago, the current government, while in opposition, the parties like Robert Fico and his mayor of Slovak National Party were organizing in parallel to official their own celebrations, either of the Slovak National Uprising or the victory in World War II. But this year, we could see significant shift. There was no military parade. Actually, Slovakia in 1995 organized one old-fashioned military parade during Mečiar's rule, and the other one we had, which was attempt to have new tradition. By the way, I was just the commander of the troops in 2008, but that was like you have military parades in France, etc. So we tried to do or to establish some new tradition. But now this year you could see the government has decided to organize sort of military festival at the abandoned military airfield, which was open to the public. But at the same time, you could see the significant rift within the society. It's not the tribalized, it's really a rift which is splitting the society. And you could see the different views on the history, but also different views on the current conflict in Ukraine. And Prime Minister, right after his appearance in Piešťany on that military or civil military festival commemorating the 80th anniversary, flown directly to Moscow to celebrate together with Putin. Now you may say, well, it's normal. Well, Soviet Union or Russia used to be the significant contributor to the victory in World War II. So what's wrong with Mr. Fico's travel to Moscow? The real issue is that he was actually contributing to Putin's propaganda, war propaganda, under the false argument. First, European Union put significant sanctions on Russia, including Vladimir Putin. Robert Fico, despite all the warnings from the political partners in Slovakia, as well as from the partners in European Union, just decided to travel and demonstrate that he is independent and he conducts so-called four-vector foreign policy, which is basically breaking or burning the bridges with the West and actually coming forward towards Mr. Putin. And in addition, he claimed that he had also some meeting with Xi Jinping. Obviously, that was just a meeting on the side of the events, which were clearly meant to be the demonstration of Russia's power and Russia stealing the whole World War II history. So it was absolutely inappropriate, and it's bringing Slovakia to isolation. But that was not the only move. So you can ask me during the Q&A period more about that if you are interested. Maybe last point. I was privileged learning the history of the World War II from the US side, also by personally meeting James Megale in his age of 91 when he came to Kabul, and that was the way I learned why 82nd Airborne Division, which was deployed by the time, has its greeting all the way. He has written the book all the way to Berlin, so it's similar story to 101st Division, a band of brothers. So I think we have to maintain celebration and commemoration of the victory in World War II, but also remember how this coalition was created and what was the value of that coalition. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. So we have all four excellent speakers who gave us a lot of information and feel for history, but also for contemporary times and celebration and how it is how things are influenced by developments in today's Europe and the world. Now, I think that we have about 12 minutes. Floor is open for any comments, questions by participants. Madison, probably if you could now step in and tell us how to proceed in order to make it smooth and use these 12 minutes for Q&A.
absolutely. So I do have a couple questions. The first question, this was asked a little bit earlier on. So I'm wondering if it's one for one of our earlier speakers. But the question is, you mentioned several groups and clubs re-emerging following the war. Do you have any information regarding the Czech Boy Scouts?
Yeah.
I think even about Czech Boy Scouts, you should answer it probably.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot for your question. Yeah, these groups played an important role at the end of the war. But let's say for the new regime after 1948, it was a huge problem. So first of all, the Sokol Sports Club and Boy Scouts, these scouts as well, because they were a huge power, huge body who potentially, and not only potentially, uh, stood against the regime, and the regime fought against him after 1948. So this group was definitely put away from the story, from the commemoration. So it was, in other words, maybe it was a huge attack against Sokols and against Scouts after 1948 by the regime. They were basically, unfortunately, erased, a tragedy.
Okay, thanks. Next questions.
Awesome, perfect. That was the only one I had in the chat. However, we do still have people here, so if there are any questions, feel free to ask
I'm
them.
ready with a question.
Yeah.
My name is Dr. Mikuláš. I'm the Vice President and COO here at the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library. And I just want to express my gratitude to all of you guests, distinguished guests being with us. I took several notes, so I'm going to have some comments, and hopefully these comments are going to conclude in raising a question. So first of all, Martin Posch, thank you so much for mentioning Slovak National Uprising. I think that there is a fantastic documentary movie which is available at YouTube under the title The Final Mission, which speaks and nicely describes that involvement of American soldiers on the Slovak soil. So I would highly recommend this. I have almost forgotten, I'm a historian and a linguist by profession, so please tolerate my longer comments. Then, speaking about those individual stories, Patrick, thank you so much for sharing your grandpa's stories, because there's another story. So it on the Czech side, we may mention Matt Konop, but on the other side, we can mention Michael Strang, and that's Ruthenian individual who participated and died. But he participated in liberating Iwo Jima, and he was the soldier among the other soldiers raising the flag. It's so photographies were really a very nice way how to demonstrate the symbols which were so important for the forces during the Second World War. So I would definitely go for in this direction, and I would support us to deal with individual stories because they are so interesting. In addition to that, I just want to raise one thing which is pretty important. We have decided to organize this webinar because we do represent Czechs and Slovaks, culturally speaking, in the United States, and as you might know, our share in American history is pretty robust. So in 1920, there were more than, based on the census, in 1920, there were more than 600,000 Czechs officially living in the United States and more than 600,000 Slovaks living officially in the United States. So we can imagine that during the Second World War, 20 years afterwards, there was a robust group or robust groups of Americans now, Americans with the Czech and Slovak ancestry living in the United States and supporting freedom and democracy and the battle for freedom and democracy. So I just wanted to mention that during the Second World War, people who are familiar with these developments might be familiar also with the so-called Liberty battleships, and they were named after heroic personalities. For instance, in case of Slovaks, um, uh, it was Štefanik, or it was Štefan Furdek. So there were groups of Slovaks raising funds and buying war bonds, and then they had the privilege to name these battleships which were actively used during the Second World War in this global conflict. On the other hand, the Czech Americans were doing the same thing. So if you look if you look up at these battleships, Liberty battleships, you can find some named after Antonín Dvořák, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, or Aleš Hrdlička. So that's also the way through which I think it's always important to remember and to commemorate that in that global conflict there were several parties involved, and this is to be remembered and this is to be recognized, just to avoid that nonsense which was so typical for the period of heavy communism in Czechoslovakia between 1948 and 1989, ending up in creating something like Homo Sovieticus, which could be seen, I think, not just in the Slovak Republic, in the Czech Republic, but also in the former East Bloc countries, appearing and reappearing again and again and again. So that refers to my comments, and the question would go to Martin Posch. Martin, are you familiar with the documentary of the Final Mission? Because that tackles. Can you say something more about that?
Well, of course, thank you for your question. I'm familiar about the document, but the reason why I was talking, I tried to put all the information to the 5 or 7 minutes, so it was not placed to say all info about the Americans in the Slug National Uprising. But what if I may put some more information? It's really important to see the Americans in the Slug National Uprising, not only the agent, but also aircrew pilot and pilots which were in the Slug National Uprising, because they were shot down during the aviatic offensive against the Germany and Slovak state, for example. But we can see their mission as some kind of trying to get Czechoslovakia in the future on the side of the West. That's the reason why I was talking about the battle for Czechoslovakia already in the 1944, because at that time Soviets were already sending their NKGB officers to the Czechoslovakia, and OCC were trying to do something similar, we can say, because when we are looking at the numbers of the agents, it's around 20 people which were sent to the Slovak National Uprising. It's too large for this territory at that time. So their goal, and this is my hypothesis, I need to focus more on the documents, for example, in the National Archives of America, is the bigger game for in the intelligence and strategic point of view of the Americans, to get some more information, to create some intelligent network in Czechoslovakia. So I know my answer is not about the document, I'm sorry about it, but I think this is really important to say that also after the February 1948, there was this saying everything was decided in Yalta, and the Czechoslovakia was sent to the east, and it's the Allied made this decision. But in Yalta, they were not talking about Czechoslovakia; they were talking about Poland. So I think it's necessary to say this information about the also activities of Americans for the after war period. So
Mhm.
I hope you are not.
Martin, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And I have probably one of the last questions because there are 2 minutes to go, but we can continue. Just please feel free. A question for Dr. Demesh and for General Matsko. What are the lessons that we should learn from while commemorating the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in 2025? Pavel?
Yeah, I would start with Pavel first.
I have already alluded a little bit to it, that actually we really have to start from the first. What was the cause of World War II? Who were the allies? And properly teach the history, because at the moment, even for Slovakia, it was not just, as already mentioned, it was not just the Soviet Union, and it was also the Romanian army, it was Czechoslovak troops, but which is more significant, all of those Soviet Union nations were participating. And actually, if you look, for example, at the history, the biggest number of civilian victims from Soviet Union was actually in Ukraine, or Ukrainians. Before the World War II, there was hunger strife for Ukrainians, which killed, by the way, famine killed 8 million Ukrainians. So Russians moved to the areas which were actually depopulated after the famine in Soviet Union. So if you look now, we should be still careful. Obviously, there is a credit to the Soviet Union and its role in the World War II. In my view, it is extremely important to also understand that nowadays Russia is not the Soviet Union which fought World War II. Second, nowadays Russia is conducting actually similar war to Nazis. Germany. Third is to remind everyone that the World War II for Russians is a great patriotic war, but it started on the 22nd of June 1941. But actually, Russians were allies of Nazi Germany in initial years of the World War II. So the real lesson, I think, is we need to stick with the values. If we talk about the assistance to Ukraine, if we talk about the other conflicts in the world, it will be always difficult. It will be always a clash in interests, but we stick to the values. That's for me as a military person, but also as citizen, because once we start to falsify the history and we don't learn anything out of it, we would repeat it.
Yeah, thank you. This was very well put, and I will just add few personal remarks. I was privileged as advisor to our first president, Michal Kovács, to attend 50th anniversary of D-Day. We sailed from Portsmouth to Normandy on Britannia yacht 8 hours, and at those days, everything seemed to be clear and that we are building Europe whole, free, and at peace. Then, 50th anniversary of World War II, we celebrated heads of states, East and West. We started in London, continued to Paris, and ended up in Moscow, where everybody, including Bill Clinton, came there. So at those days, 30 years ago, we thought that we are building world of peace from Vancouver to Vladivostok. Nowadays, we are confronted yet again with war situation on European continent. And as was said, many propagandistic tools and methods are used to divide yet again Europe. And I think that it is now of utmost importance that alliance, United States, Canada, Great Britain, and European Union, that we should stick together and finish as soon as possible this bloody war in Ukraine and start to restore norms and multilateralism as it was done after World War II. And I think that upcoming summit of NATO in Hague in July, where United States, Canada, and many others and our Europeans, we should rethink on glory of past battles 80 years ago when we defeated German Nazism, that now together we need to restore order and make world more predictable. And so for this reason, I think that everybody has a role to play. You in the United States, we here in Europe. You can be military or historian, student or teacher. I think that I'm happy that we did this webinar because we had speakers of various generations and backgrounds. I think that talking about truth and building on values, here I subscribe what Pavel said, that this is what is making our alliance, our transatlantic alliance, strong. If we are sticking to values for which our grandfathers were fighting for and were able to bring and sacrifice. So for that reason, I think that more we talk about that, bring truth, but also keep in touch in this issue of values, which sometimes in these turbulences are quite shaken. So for that reason, I think that Dalibor, probably you should thank Doug and everybody and close the session.
Thank you so much. Before we are going to end it up, I just yes, I'm just more than happy to say thank you once again, Madison. Usually, in the end, we ask for some instructions, final instructions. So if you can share it with us.
So kind of like I have on the screen already, if you are able or willing to send me your email and your institution, whether it's via the email on screen or in the chat here on Zoom, that would be super great for our records, just so then we know what our attendance is and who is coming to these events, so then we know just kind of for our own personal records. And then we can also send you more information about the upcoming webinar that we'll have later on this summer. And we also have some more podcasts that will be coming out as well. So be sure to check out our Facebook, social media, and our website as well for more information.
Thank you, Madison, very much. And once again, thank you all of us who joined this webinar. We have recorded the webinar. It'll be available not just at our website, but also at ncsmltv.com. So once again, we would be more than happy to see you again at the coming webinar. And once we have that set, we're going to share it with all of you. Dignitaries, guests, once again, thank you for your time and looking forward to being in touch with you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Real honor.
Bye.